Good morning. I'm Nicole Ringgold. This is my studio. Today I'm going to do a demonstration, a full-length tutorial on how to fabricate a bird's nest. And what's cool about it is that you can use all recycled scraps from sheet and wire. I stumbled upon making this by wondering what I could do with all of my leftover jump rings, all of the ones that I screwed up, and just wondered what I could do by building on them, fusing them together. So a good portion of this project is fusing, and if you are struggling with that, you might want to go back to some of my earlier tutorials on how to fabricate chains, because I go into depth there on how to fuse wire. This takes that concept to another level. About a third of the nest is fused, and then I move over to hard, medium, and then if you choose, you can use easy solder. In any case, this is the goal. Don't know if you can see that. These have eggs inside, and you can turn it into a sculptural ring, pendant. You can make it smaller, you can make it bigger. I've made them quite a bit larger. I've made life-size hummingbird nests with this same concept, but this basically walks you through the beginning steps. So let's move forward. And again, as every other tutorial that I've shown you, thank you to Rio Grande for sponsoring my YouTube channel. I appreciate you. Okay, and let me know if you have any questions, comments, leave them below, and I will respond as soon as I can. Thank you. All right, here we go. Here you can see I have all sorts of jump rings. Some have been fused, some are still open, different gauges from 20 gauge. This is a half round wire. Some of them are 18 gauge. I start with the smallest of circles. Again, some of them are fused. These are previously fused, but it's not necessary that they are. I'm going to put 2, maybe 3 kind of on top of each other to create this is actually the outside of the bottom of the nest. I use a Little Smith torch. If you have questions about this specific torch, I offer a full-length tutorial on the Little Smith oxygen propane torch. You'll just have to go back and visit that. And then I'm going to use a pick as a heat sink, and I'm focusing on the bottom link. And that is what I consider a soft fuse, where I can still see the details between the two, but they're not going to come apart unless I pull them apart using pliers. Take these and add them to another. This one's already fused, but again, it doesn't need to be. Focusing on the bottom, because it takes the bottom one a little bit longer to heat. A reminder, when you fuse, each component needs to reach the exact same temperature at the exact same time. So the larger your mass grows, the longer it's going to take to heat the mass. Using my pick to protect the layers on top, they're a little bit more vulnerable. This is a titanium pick by Lion Punch Forge. Here's a jump ring. I'm pulling it apart just a little bit because each consecutive layer needs to be a tiny bit larger than the one before. So here again, I'm going to use my pick to protect the top layers. I'm going to heat. It's going to take a little bit longer to heat the mass. So I'm heating the mass and then coming down so that just those spots on the bottom fuse. This one's a little bit further apart, as you can see, a little bit bigger. And once again, I'm going to be using my pick to protect the pieces on top. Also to ensure that they're touching, because when you're fusing, your metal must be touching. It doesn't have to be perfectly flush. It just needs to be touching. That's the right amount of oxygen propane for the Little Smith. heating the mass, using my pick if I need to protect and also just ensure that it's touching. And it'll fuse once the mass and that bottom ring are the same temperature. Basically, they are melting temperature, and then they'll fuse as long as you do them at the exact same time. This one's a little bit bigger, opening it up, taking the nest. I'm going to put it on top. I moved further out so that you could see what I was doing with the other jump rings. I'll need to heat the mass a little bit more, and once it's reached its temperature, I can move to the bottom to fuse it. Doing it again, heating the mass, moving my torch down to the bottom, ensuring with my pick that they're touching. And then at this point, I'm gonna start filling in some of the gaps. I've got a half jump ring, and it's best if you fuse not just one side, but both. So as you'll see, I need to heat the mass, using my pick to protect that one small half jump ring, and then I'm heating the mass to ensure it fuses. Putting another one on, this is a half jump ring. Using my pick to protect that half jump ring, heating the mass, which was already hot, so I didn't have to do too much heating. As the nest starts to get larger, I tend to flip it over and continue to work on building it, which is actually building it upward, and filling in gaps. So I'm gonna bounce back and forth until the mass becomes probably a little bit too large to continue to fuse, at which point I'll start to use flux and hard solder, but I'm not there yet. Once I'm done fusing, as I'm again continuing to build up the sides of the nest, I turn it over to see if it sits straight, which this doesn't. So since it's cattywampus, this is where I need to start filling in. I'm going to use a lot of 3/4 jump rings, 1/2 jump rings to fill in those gaps. And again, the gauge really doesn't matter. I think it looks a little bit more organic when you use different kinds of gauges from, like I said in the beginning, I even have gone down to 26 gauge sterling silver wire. I'm going to zoom in so that you can see the details a little bit better as I'm growing this nest. So here you can see I'm heating the mass. Put my pick on the vulnerable tip of that jump ring, right there. And once the mass is heated, that's fused. It balled a little bit, but that's okay. Turn it over to see if it's sitting straight, which it's not quite. So right in here, I need to continue to add a little bit more mass. Putting another jump ring. This one looks like it's 16 gauge. Heating the mass, using my pick to protect that wire and to hold it in place. And then I'm going to fuse it until that's a soft fuse where you can see the details. I consider it a hard fuse when you fuse your two components together and you start to lose the details where they become one solid mass. Okay, at this point it's starting to become a little bit harder to fuse. So I would pickle your piece and then flux it. And at this point you're going to start using hard solder. I use Mighty Flux, Flux from Rio Grande. I also prefer to use wire solder, so this is hard wire solder that I snip into little bits. And then I like to pick solder all of these components together. I'm also using Lindstrom flush cutters, which are very precise. All right, I have all of my little bits of solder snipped. Turning on my torch, everything is well fluxed. And then I have a titanium pick, as I said, from Lion Punch Forge. Be sure to heat your solder, not your pick. Now I'm heating the entire mass to ensure that the mass is hot enough to accept the solder. And then I'm going to, once I see that my mass has turned a slight yellow hue, that means solder flow point, and I can go directly to the spot where I want the solder to flow, and it should flow immediately. I pickled, I fluxed again, picking up my hard solder. Make sure that you are heating the solder, not your pick, or else your solder will just smear across your surface. Heating my mass, ensuring that the entire mass is warm, and then I can go specifically to that spot where I want the solder to flow. Once again, heating the mass. Once it turns a slight yellow hue, you can move your torch to the exact spot where you want your solder to flow. Sometimes it works to put your piece sideways so that you can continue to fill gaps without it falling over. As you can see, I've heated my mass. It turned a slight yellow hue. I don't know if you can see that. Picking up my solder. My pick is a little bit hot, so it's taking a bit longer to pick it up. In which case you might want to just quench your pick. There you go. Heating the mass. You can go to that spot and your solder will flow. Once you think that you have the height of the nest balls that you want, you can take all of these extra half jump rings, quarter jump rings, and stick them into where you find gaps. And you might want to move over to medium solder so that your previous solder joints, your previous hard solder joints don't come apart. And if you find that it's challenging to hold your piece stable when you're filling in the side gaps and maybe you want to set it on its side, Lion Punch Forge sells a titanium quad or a Ti-Quad, and this is the top shelf for that Ti-Quad, and I use it often to balance my pieces. As I mentioned, at this point I've moved over to medium solder. And sometimes when I am a little worried about maybe some of the fused pieces coming off, at this point I can go back through and fill in with solder in those little spots just to ensure that they don't snap off. Just be certain that your piece is, 1, clean so you can pickle it, and 2, fluxed before you continue to solder to all of your previously fused joints. And then sometimes I take the wire and I hammer it flat, or maybe I have some sheet that's just sawn off or very, very thin. And I like to use the flat wire to make it look a little bit more realistic, a little bit wispy of a nest. And I stick those, sometimes I'll even twist them, and then I'll stick those randomly throughout the nest and solder them in. And given that you perhaps have medium solder at this point all over your nest, you may want to switch over to easy solder. And again, as you're moving forward, your mass, the nest, is becoming larger and larger and larger. So if you're using a little Smith torch, you're going to have to turn up your propane as you move forward, turn up your propane and your oxygen to match. And then you're also going to have to make sure that you heat the mass, the nest, sufficiently before trying to get your solder to flow right around the wire that you just placed in there. Because otherwise, if you're only focusing on the wire, then one, you're going to burn off the flux before the solder has a chance to flow, in which case your piece will oxidize and your solder will not flow. So just be sure that you're heating the entire mass. Once it's all set, then you can put it in the pickle till it's nice and white. Quench. If you want, you can add eggs. And then I like to do liver of sulfur and polish it up. And this one in particular is going to be a pendant. And that's it. Reach out if you have questions, comments, and thank you. I hope you enjoy. Have a great day.